Everything About Buddhism, a journey from philosophy to religion to manipulation. Hello, dear listeners. Today we will embark on a special journey through time together. This is a time to explore the long journey from a prince in India, 2,500 years ago, to the Buddhism we encounter today. Have you ever had this experience? Going to a temple to light candles and make wishes, holding a 49-day memorial service for the deceased, or putting money in donation boxes while hoping for good things to happen in your heart. I have too. I remember as a child, holding my grandmother's hand and going to the temple, bowing before a large Buddha statue and praying to do well on exams. At the time, I thought it was natural. But as I grew older and read books and studied, I discovered something strange. What I experienced at the temple was so different from the early Buddhist teachings I read about in books. It was like seeing two completely different people with the same name. That's how I started what I want to share with you today, this exploration. This is a time to discover together when, how, and why Buddhism became what it is today. The core question we'll explore together today is this: when did Buddhism change from philosophy to religion, and how did it sometimes become a tool for manipulating people? Don't worry. This journey isn't simply about criticism. Rather, it's a journey to develop the ability to distinguish between the real and the fake, and to live a wiser life. It's like panning for gold by sifting through sand. First story: a young prince's enlightenment. 2,500 years ago in northern India, in a small kingdom at the foot of the Himalayas, lived a young prince named Gautama Siddhartha. He is the one we call the Buddha. But do you know that before he became the Buddha, he was an ordinary person just like you and me? He was a regular person who worried, wondered, and sometimes despaired. Why did someone who could live affluently in a royal palace abandon everything and set out on a journey? To find the answer to this question, let's go back to that era for a moment. 6th century BCE India was a time of change. Existing religious powers were shaking, and new ideas were blooming. You can think of it as a period like Korea's 1960s or ancient Greece's golden age of philosophy. Against this historical backdrop, Siddhartha developed his own special sense of problematic awareness. It was about the reality that none of us can avoid. Aging, sickness, death, and the human mind that suffers endlessly through all of this. But Siddhartha's approach was different. When others said you just need to pray to God or perform rituals, he asked, what is the real cause of this suffering? And is there a fundamental way to solve it? Here's a really important point we must not miss. Siddhartha did not seek help from gods. He did not hope for miracles. He did not commission rituals from the Brahmins who held power at the time. He tried to find answers thoroughly through human reason and experience. Imagine how revolutionary this thinking was for that time. Let me explain the situation in India at that time. A priestly class called Brahmins held absolute power. They claimed that only they could communicate with gods, and that salvation could only be achieved through rituals they performed. And they discriminated against people based on birth, through the caste system. But Siddhartha rejected all of this. The message was, no need for gods, no need for rituals, no need for Brahmins. You can achieve enlightenment yourself. To compare this with modern times, it would be like when medical professionals monopolize and claim only they can cure diseases. Someone appears and says you can become healthy yourself through exercise and diet management. Naturally, it would have been threatening to the privileged class. Siddhartha's decision to renounce worldly life at 29 was not a sudden impulse. It was the result of long contemplation and reflection. According to legend, when he went outside the palace, he saw an old man, a sick person, a dead person, and an ascetic. And he was shocked but we shouldn't view this merely as a personal experience. Think about the age of 29. It's a time when you want to find greater meaning and purpose beyond personal happiness. In today's terms, it's the age when you start wondering if this is how you should live. Siddhartha left behind his wife and newborn son. This could be seen as irresponsible, but he wasn't simply escaping. It was an anguished choice to find a more fundamental solution. After leaving the palace, Siddhartha sought out famous teachers of the time. He learned from 2 meditation masters, but was not satisfied. No matter how deep a meditative state he entered, it was temporary. When he came out of meditation, suffering began again. So this time, he chose the path of extreme asceticism. He practiced for 6 years, eating only 1 grain of rice per day. His body became skeletal, and he nearly died. But this wasn't the answer either. Tormenting the body didn't free the mind. Rather, extreme asceticism was another form of attachment. At age 35, Siddhartha discovered the middle way, the middle path, neither extreme pleasure nor extreme asceticism. He focused on meditation while eating moderately, resting moderately, and calmly observing his mind. Under the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya, he finally achieved enlightenment. Do you know what he discovered? It was the chain of desire. The realization was that we suffer because we constantly want something, become attached to it, and cannot let it go. More precisely, it was that we suffer because we cannot accept reality as it is and distort it according to our expectations and desires. Do you know this is remarkably similar to modern psychology? It's almost identical to what modern psychotherapy calls distorted thought patterns. Siddhartha organized his enlightenment into the 4 Noble Truths. Here's how to interpret them in modern terms. First, the truth of suffering. Acknowledging that there is suffering in life. Because solving problems begins with acknowledging that problems exist. Modern psychotherapy is the same. Recognizing and accepting one's problems is the first step in treatment. Second, the truth of the cause of suffering. The cause of suffering is attachment. Understanding the fundamental cause, not just the superficial cause. It's like a doctor finding the cause of disease, rather than just looking at symptoms. Third, the truth of the cessation of suffering. If you let go of attachment, suffering disappears, giving hope that problems can be solved. The message is not to despair, but to believe in possibilities. Fourth, the truth of the path. There is a method. It's not just ending with theory, but presenting concrete, practical methods. Isn't it amazing how similar this structure is to modern problem-solving methods? It has the same logical structure as medical diagnosis, treatment processes, or business problem-solving processes. The specific content of the truth of the path, the Noble Eightfold Path, is even more practical. It means 8 right ways, which I'll examine one by one. Right view is correct perspective, seeing reality as it is, the ability to look objectively without preconceptions or prejudices. Right intention is correct thinking, thinking in healthy and constructive directions, breaking away from negative and destructive thought patterns. Right speech is correct words, avoiding lies, discord, curses, and idle chatter, and speaking truthfully and beneficially. Right action is correct behavior, acting in ways that don't harm others. Right livelihood is correct living, maintaining livelihood in ways that don't harm others. Right effort is correct endeavor, making steady and balanced efforts. The middle way of effort, neither too loose nor too tense. Right mindfulness is correct remembrance, focusing on the present moment and clearly observing one's physical and mental states. This is the same concept as modern mindfulness. Right. Concentration is correct focus. Meditation practice to stabilize the mind and develop concentration. What's important is that all these things are concrete practices that can be implemented in daily life. No special supernatural abilities or mystical ceremonies were needed. Looking at the early Buddhist community, we can see how his philosophy was actually implemented. Egalitarianism. The caste system was ignored. Anyone could enter the Sangha regardless of whether they were Brahmin or Shudra. Even women could become nuns. This was truly progressive for the time. Democratic operation. Important decisions in the Sangha were made through discussion and consensus among members. It was a kind of democratic operating method, principle of non-possession. Personal ownership was minimized. They owned only essential things like clothes, bowls, and needles. Intellectual inquiry was encouraged. Direct experience and rational inquiry were emphasized rather than blind faith. Non-violence was practiced. The principle of respecting all life was thoroughly maintained. What Siddhartha showed was faith in human potential. It was a revolutionary message that each of us can become our own savior. But how this pure philosophy changed is what we'll examine in the next story. Second story, Buddhism's transformation upon meeting power. About 200 years after Siddhartha left this world, a figure who changed Indian history appeared. This was Emperor Ashoka. This person's story is quite dramatic. Initially, he was a cruel conqueror. Particularly in the Kalinga War, he killed hundreds of thousands and forcibly relocated millions. But after the war ended, it's said he deeply repented upon seeing the carnage he had caused. And he converted to Buddhism. At first glance, it sounds like a beautiful story. A tyrant gaining enlightenment and becoming a compassionate king. But from here, Buddhism's fate began to change dramatically. Ashoka made Buddhism the state religion of his entire empire. He built countless temples, gave land and property to monks, and carved Buddhist teachings in stone and erected them everywhere. He even sent Buddhist missionaries to Sri Lanka, Greece, and Egypt. Buddhism became a huge religious institution overnight. It transformed from a small community of poor practitioners into an organization with enormous wealth and power. But here we must ask an important question. What was Ashoka's real reason for supporting Buddhism? Officially, it goes like this. He repented after seeing the carnage of the Kalinga War, was moved by Buddhism's teachings of compassion, and truly wanted to become a compassionate king. But historians also suggest other possibilities. To govern a vast multi-ethnic empire, the existing Brahmanism would have had limitations. Brahmanism was essentially the religion of the Indian Aryan people. Buddhism, on the other hand, had a universal message. It was a religion that transcended caste, ethnicity, and region. Such a universal religion would have been much more useful for imperial governance. With Ashoka's support, the monastic community gained unprecedented power. They owned land, collected taxes from farmers, and gained political voice in the royal court. Do you know how different this was from Siddhartha's original teachings? He emphasized non-possession and equality. He said renunciants should own nothing and treat all beings equally. But monks with power gradually became a privileged class. They became religious aristocrats ruling over ordinary believers. As Buddhism combined with power, Buddhist doctrine also rapidly became complex. Siddhartha's simple and practical teachings changed into sophisticated but difficult to understand philosophical systems. Complex philosophy called Abhidhamma developed, and Buddhism split into more than 20 sects claiming different doctrines. And a new movement called Mahayana Buddhism began, even disparaging existing Buddhism as Hinayana. Why did this complexification occur? First, Since monks no longer had to worry about survival, they could dedicate themselves to pure theoretical research. Second, more sophisticated theories were needed to differentiate from existing Hinduism and other philosophies. Third, complex doctrines elevated the authority of experts. The more content ordinary people couldn't understand, the greater the importance of monks became. An even more important change was the perception of Siddhartha himself. Originally, he said he was one enlightened human being. I am not a god. I am merely one who has awakened. You too can awaken. But as time passed, he gradually transformed into a transcendent being. The title Buddha became a proper noun, and he began to be worshipped as a divine being with supernatural powers. Third story, Buddhism meets spirits. Buddhism, institutionalized through Emperor Ashoka's support, actively spread outside India. In China, Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, and Tibet, ancient folk beliefs were already deeply rooted in each land. But something truly interesting happened. Buddhism didn't reject these indigenous beliefs, but rather actively absorbed them. In China, it met Taoist immortals. In Korea, it combined with shamanism. And in Japan, it merged with Shintoism. Through this process, Buddhism transformed into completely different forms. Like water taking different shapes depending on what container it's poured into, Buddhism became entirely different religions depending on what culture it encountered. Here's how Buddhism spread and changed. 1. India, the child who disappeared from home. Did you know that Buddhism almost disappeared from India, its birthplace? This is an irony like pasta disappearing from Italy. From the 7th to 13th centuries, due to Islamic invasions and the revival of Hinduism, Buddhism gradually declined. From sociologist Max Weber's Sociology of Religion perspective, religion is closely related to society's power structures. Buddhism's disappearance from India was not simply due to religious reasons, but the result of complex political and social factors. 2. Thailand, black shadows behind golden robes. Thailand is a representative country of Theravada Buddhism, but in recent years, Thai Buddhism has been embroiled in serious scandals. Sexual crimes, child abuse, and drug-related incidents have erupted one after another. Adding a somewhat cynical perspective here, this is not simply individual deviance. According to social psychology's power corruption theory, absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. In Thai society, monks are considered almost sacred and inviolable, so this power structure actually created an environment that encouraged corruption. 3. Myanmar. Massacre committed in the name of compassion. The Rohingya massacre in Myanmar is one of the most shocking events in Buddhist history. How could such a thing happen in a Buddhist culture that emphasizes compassion and non-killing? This can be explained by the psychological phenomenon called in-group bias. Humans tend to prefer their own group and can become hostile toward other groups. Myanmar Buddhists saw themselves as guardians of pure Buddhist culture and perceived the Muslim Rohingya as outside invaders. Evolutionary psychologist Jonathan Haidt points out in The Righteous Mind that religion can promote moral behavior but can also amplify intergroup conflicts. Myanmar's case clearly demonstrates this. 4. China. Buddhism under the red flag. Buddhism in China is in a special situation. It was almost destroyed during the Cultural Revolution, then revived under government control after reform and opening. But is this true revival or transformation into a political tool? According to French philosopher Michel Foucault's theory of power, power doesn't prohibit, but produces and encourages. The Chinese government didn't ban Buddhism, but restructured it to fit their ruling ideology. How close is this state-controlled Buddhism to Buddha's teachings? 5. Japan. Buddhism meets samurai spirit. Japanese Buddhism has a unique history. From the Kamakura period, it combined with the warrior class, and Buddhism, which originally pursued peace, was sometimes used as a tool to justify war. Adding a somewhat cynical perspective here, what about modern Japan's new religions, like Soka Gakkai? They wear the veneer of religion, but seem more interested in expanding political influence and pursuing economic interests. Religious sociologist Rodney Stark explained this phenomenon through religious market theory. Religion has also become a competing commodity. 6. Tibet, the Dalai Lama's shadow. The Dalai Lama is globally regarded as a symbol of peace and compassion. But was past Tibetan society truly ideal? According to anthropological research, Tibet under the Dalai Lama's rule was a strict class society. The monk class monopolized privileges, while serfs suffered extreme discrimination. This was far from Buddhism's egalitarian ideals. 7. Korea. More temples than chicken restaurants. But Korean Buddhism developed centered on the Jogye order. But recently, various corruption and scandals have been endless. Problems like real estate speculation by the chief administrator and privatization of temple property have erupted one after another. From a behavioral economics perspective, this is a moral hazard phenomenon. Religious leaders abuse the social trust that their position brings to pursue private interests. Unconditional respect and trust for monks in Korean society may have actually fostered these problems. Buddhism that entered Korea underwent changes that help us understand this process very well. Korean Buddhism became one of the most unique forms of Buddhism in the world. Buddhism first transmitted to Korea in 372 CE met existing shamanism. Shamanism was an indigenous belief deeply rooted in Korean's spiritual world. Various deities existed: mountain gods, dragon kings, Samshin grandmother, ancestral spirits, and shamans communicated with them to solve people's problems. Initially, there was conflict. Buddhism was considered a higher religion, while shamanism was seen as primitive. But as time passed, something amazing happened. Buddhism began absorbing shamanism. Beings that didn't originally exist in Buddhism began to be enshrined in temples. Samshin grandmother, a uniquely Korean deity who grants children, was enshrined in Samshin Gak. Dragon kings, water deities governing seas and rivers, found places in Yongwangak. Mountain gods were deities protecting mountains, riding tigers, and the seven-star deity was a personification of the Big Dipper. All these were enshrined in Gak, shrine, or Jon, hall, becoming official members of temples. This was truly an interesting transformation. More interesting was the theological reinterpretation that occurred in this process. Rather than completely excluding existing indigenous gods, they were incorporated as subordinate deities of Buddhism. The hierarchical structure looks like this: Buddha at the top as supreme deity, bodhisattvas below as Buddha's representatives, then Dharma protectors as gods protecting Buddhism, and at the bottom, indigenous gods as lower deities managing regions. Through this structure, they could minimize resistance from people with existing beliefs while establishing Buddhism's superiority. The message was, we acknowledge the gods you believed in, but Buddha is higher. This was truly sophisticated religious strategy. It was similar to how the Roman Empire incorporated conquered territories' gods into the Roman pantheon. The most problematic change was introducing an economic transaction structure. Originally, Buddhism emphasized non-possession, but as it combined with folk beliefs, a system of buying blessings with money was created. Looking at newly created ceremonies, Chondo Jai, ceremonies for the dead, 49 Jai performed 49 days after death, Bekil Jai performed 100 days after death. Gijesa is Buddhist-style ancestral rites performed annually on death anniversaries, and Yonga Chondo are ceremonies to send wandering souls to paradise. Prayer ceremonies for worldly benefits also emerged. Sansin prayers for health and longevity, Yongwang prayers for business and wealth, Samshin prayers for children, Chilsong prayers for lifespan and fortune. Do you know what these ceremonies have in common? Money must be paid for them to be effective. A system was created where the more money paid, the better location and longer duration of prayers. Market mechanisms entered religion. The logic of supply and demand, price and quality was applied to the spiritual world. Here, we can discover a very sophisticated psychological manipulation structure. It's almost identical to modern marketing techniques. Stage 1. Creating anxiety. Creating anxiety by saying things like, "You'll go to hell when you die," "Ancestors are suffering," "Your karma is heavy," "Vengeful spirits are following you." Stage 2. Presenting solutions. Offering solutions like, "This ceremony will solve it," "This prayer will bring blessings," "Carrying this talisman will protect you." Stage 3. Economic demands. Requiring money by saying sincere donations are needed for effectiveness. Expensive offerings are better. More money means longer prayers. Stage 4. Unverifiability of results. When ineffective, blaming the victim. Your sincerity was insufficient. It will be effective in the next life. You're receiving help in invisible ways. This is identical to typical fraud structures. Create problems, present solutions, demand money, and blame victims for failures. Fourth story, the truth, hidden in the tale of Sim Cheong. Once upon a time, there was a blind man named Sim Bongsa. He had a good and filial daughter named Sim Cheong. Have you heard this story? It's the tale of Sim Cheong that everyone has heard at least once. We learned it as the story of a filial daughter who sacrificed herself to restore her father's sight. You probably have memories of being moved by this story as children. I did too. But when I reread this story as an adult, I began to notice something strange. Was this really a beautiful story of filial piety? Or was there another message hidden within it? The most important turning point in the tale of Sim Cheong is the scene where the wandering monk appears. Let's carefully analyze what the wandering monk said to Sim Bongsa. This shows a pattern remarkably similar to modern religious fraud. Translating the wandering monk's words into modern terms. Your disability is due to your karma. You're suffering like this because of sins committed in past lives. But there's a solution. If you donate 300 sacks of rice to the temple, you can open your eyes through Buddha's grace. Analyzing this logical structure step by step. Stage 1. Defining the problem. Saying you have a problem, defining disability as personal karma, connecting present suffering with past sins, transforming the victim into a potential perpetrator. Stage 2. Mystifying the cause. Claiming there's an invisible cause, presenting unverifiable causes like past lives, using abstract concepts like karma, employing explanatory methods that avoid scientific verification. Stage 3. Monopolizing the solution. Claiming only we can solve it. Securing monopolistic position through religious authority, denying the existence of other alternatives. Claiming authority disguised as expertise. Stage 4. Presenting conditions. Saying a price must be paid, presenting specific and measurable conditions, justifying and beautifying sacrifice, combining economic interests with religious justification. Stage 5. Transferring responsibility. Saying it's your fault if ineffective, blaming the client's lack of sincerity for failure, maintaining the infallibility of religious authority, preparing grounds for additional demands. This is exactly identical to methods used by modern fraudsters. We learned that Sim Cheong's decision to sell herself was filial piety. But let's really think about whether that's true. From a developmental psychology perspective, Sim Cheong was a 15-year-old girl. According to modern developmental psychology, this is an age that doesn't yet have complete judgment ability. Particularly, it's a period lacking abstract thinking and long-term consequence prediction abilities. Is it normal judgment for a 15-year-old girl to think she must die to restore her father's sight? This is more likely the result of religious brainwashing rather than filial piety. From a social psychology perspective, this situation is called learned helplessness. When exposed to desperate situations for a long time, one comes to accept even irrational choices. Sim Cheong grew up in poverty and discrimination from birth. She would have learned that she had no agency over her own life. In such circumstances, she blindly accepted the solution presented by religious authority. Fifth story, the wisdom of discernment. So far, we have walked a long journey together. We've watched the process from one human's pure enlightenment 2,500 years ago to how it became religion, combined with power, mixed with folk beliefs, and finally became a tool of manipulation. Now it's time to ask the final question. How should we live? What should we believe? And what should we doubt? The first question to ask when evaluating any religion or spiritual teaching is this. Is this truly pursuing wisdom, or is it pursuing economic profit? First criterion, philosophy or business. Let's recall Buddhism as philosophy. Siddhartha abandoned all the wealth of the royal palace. What he pursued was truth, not wealth or power. His teaching was, have less, want less, become freer. But many religious institutions today are the opposite. They say, give more, pray more, then you'll receive more blessings. This is business, not philosophy. Second criterion, does it lead to freedom or control through fear? True spiritual teaching liberates people. It frees them from fear and anxiety. But manipulative religion is the opposite. It creates new fears and uses those fears to control people. Third criterion, does it encourage thought and reflection or demand blind obedience? Healthy religion encourages people to think and judge for themselves. It welcomes having doubts and encourages asking questions. Remember Siddhartha's last words. Enlightenment must be achieved by oneself. Doubt even my words. Accept only what you directly experience and find to be correct. This is remarkably similar to scientific methodology. Form hypotheses, experiment, verify, and keep open the possibility of refutation. But manipulative religion is the opposite. Don't doubt, just believe. Questioning is evidence of insufficient faith. Fourth criterion, does it practice empathy and equality or promote hierarchy and discrimination? The core of all great religions is love and compassion, treating all beings equally and comforting those who suffer. Siddhartha's rejection of the caste system and acceptance of people from all classes as disciples was from this spirit. But as religion became institutionalized and gained power, new hierarchies were created. Hierarchies between monks and lay people, clergy and ordinary believers, establishment and general public. Fifth criterion, does it help my growth or force me to sacrifice for others? Healthy religion harmonizes individual growth with collective happiness. It recognizes that I must be healthy and happy to help others. But manipulative religion forces individual sacrifice. Abandon yourself and live for others. Suffering is practice. Pleasure is sin. Finally, let me offer suggestions about what kind of religion and spirituality we should pursue going forward. First, spirituality that is both individual and communal. not enlightenment for oneself alone, but spirituality of growing together, while maintaining individual subjectivity that doesn't get absorbed into the group. Second, spirituality that is both rational and emotional, not blind faith but spirituality based on rational thinking, yet including warm emotions, not just cold logic. Third, spirituality that is both traditional and modern, respecting past wisdom while harmonizing with modern scientific knowledge. Fourth, spirituality that is both local and universal, recognizing the uniqueness of specific cultures while pursuing universal values that all humanity can share. Let me suggest concrete methods for pursuing such healthy spirituality. Reading and learning are important. Read classics of various religions and philosophies. Don't be confined to one tradition, but explore broadly. Practice meditation and reflection. Don't be bound by specific religious forms. Find meditation methods that suit you. What's important is not form, but cultivating inner peace and wisdom. Enjoy dialogue and discussion. Have open-minded conversations with people of different beliefs. Don't try to impose your beliefs or convince others, but share each other's experiences. Try service and practice. Concrete practice is more important than abstract doctrine. Participate in helping poor neighbors, protecting the environment, and realizing justice. Develop critical thinking. Develop the habit of asking questions like, is this really so? Aren't there other perspectives? Is this actually effective? When hearing any teaching. The story we've examined so far is by no means meant to deny religion or spirituality itself. Rather, to pursue true spirituality, we must face the hypocrisy of institutionalized power. Adding a somewhat cynical perspective here, some people will probably find this story uncomfortable, especially those deeply immersed in specific religions. But just because facing truth is painful doesn't mean we can settle for falsehood. As Buddha said, the first step in escaping ignorance is acknowledging one's own ignorance. Questioning again what we believe, what we take for granted. This would be the beginning of true enlightenment. What we need as people living in modern times is not blind faith, but awakened consciousness. Not depending on authority, but judging for ourselves. Not getting buried in doctrine, but experiencing directly. Not being deceived by institutional hypocrisy, but pursuing truth. This is not easy. Sometimes it may be lonely and anxious. But isn't this the true freedom that the prince sought 2,500 years ago when he left the palace? I hope we all find our own Bodhi tree and move toward our own enlightenment. Don't forget that all authorities and doctrines we meet on that path are merely references, not absolute truths. Looking back at the end of this long journey, we realize we haven't just talked about Buddhism. We've shared a universal story about how human spiritual quest begins, how it becomes corrupted, and how it can be restored. The journey that began with a young prince's pure question 2,500 years ago continues today. Each of us still lives with the same question. How can we escape suffering and find true happiness? No one can give us the answer to this question. As Siddhartha said, each person must directly experience and realize it. All we can do is respect each other's journeys, share wisdom together, and help each other not to fall into wrong paths. I hope today's time has been a small help in your spiritual journey. Whatever you believe, whatever path you choose, may it be a path that truly makes you free and happy. Please remember just one thing. Truth is always simple. Complex and difficult things are mostly human creations. Listen to the simple and clear voice that resonates from deep within your heart. That will lead you to true peace. Thank you for being with me for this long time. I wish wisdom and peace to accompany all your journeys.